And in this video, we are going to be making all this noise. In this video, we're going to be talking about the number 1. This is a numerology study. So keep in mind that, yes, we will be applying principles associated with mathematics, but we will be using simple gematria, and we're studying the number and its symbolism. And we're going to look at the practical value of this knowledge. So in studying anything, you know, for me, I resonate with it when I can kind of see the practical value in it or understand, you know, the purpose of it all. So in my study of numerology, I try to explain things based on how you can actually apply what you're learning in your life, or your understanding or interpretation of the world, your reality, your environment, and also alchemy, as I mentioned in another video. So this is, you know, relative to the inner work that we're all doing. So before we talk about the number 1 and its symbolism, we first have to have a little bit of an understanding of 0. And what does 0 represent? We're looking at 0 as a symbol as well. So when you think of 0, we typically in mathematics, we don't give it any value. But interestingly enough, 0 is everything and nothing at the same time. 0 has a negative and a positive influence when we're talking about numerology. And we're going to look at this from the esoteric perspective. So 0 can represent the void, and we can associate this void with the womb. It's feminine in that it's open, it's receptive. The qualities associated with it are also birth, because every other number comes out of 0. Not literally comes out of 0, but it's the contrast that's needed to give other numbers their value. So 1 isn't 1 if you couldn't contrast it with 0, which would represent no thing. So night is night, and we experience nighttime in its contrast to the daytime. So our reality and our experience here is very much about that duality. So 0 would be the first to initiate thought associated with this duality. No thing into something. So 1 would be the beginning of something. 0 would represent no thing. But the reason it has a negative and a positive is because if you associate this with the feminine, the womb man, even quite literally the vagina, it not only receives, but it also gives birth. So it has that quality in it being a receptive energy, that what it receives, it can produce something from that. Look at it in the perspective of the void. As in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, that the earth was formless and void. This void could definitely represent the earth in the sense that we plant seeds in the earth. We dig a hole, put our seeds in, we cover it up, and it's in the darkness. So this represents endless possibilities, endless potentiality. This is what makes it positive in that regard, that anything can be birthed from this idea of the 0, of nothingness, emptiness, void. When you go into a state of meditation, you need to enter into this space where you're not thinking about a lot of things or anything at all, which is so difficult for many of us to attain because we're always wanting to manifest and project and produce. But we have to return to that state of void. So interestingly enough, and this is probably a whole nother video, because 0 is primordial, it would be associated with the woman of color, or the black woman. And again, this will be a whole nother video, but because it has been viewed as having no value, you can comparatively see how these women, and I may project some bias in this topic, but these women have been the least respected, least protected, and least valued in times past, especially in our history within the American history. So it's something to reflect on, because it is quite valuable. There is something to be gained in that. Women in general typically reflect anything to do with the feminine, such as the earth, but black women in particular have a significance in how the earth is being reflected in the treatment of these women. So we'll further that discussion another time, but keep in mind that 0 does represent the toroidal, the Torus, or if you would like to look up the toroidal vortex, and you can look at an animation of the toroidal vortex, and you'll see how it does represent this negative and positive flow. Because as humans, we can sometimes, and most of the times, we do things and we create unconsciously, which is also what this can represent, the unconscious. We do and we create things unconsciously, but then we create this vacuum effect where we're sucked into our own experiences. It's karma. It's what goes around, comes back around. So study the toroidal vortex. Just watch it for a little bit and study it and see what symbolism and observation your mind picks up. So I mentioned 0 being primordial. Let's even look at the word 0. This is taking a look at the Gematria. This is simple Gematria. I know in the past I've said English Gematria, but apparently in the Gematria community, that's not correct. It's simple Gematria when I do this, associating the numbers with the letters. So Z is 8, 5, 9, and 6. That's 15 plus 5 is 20. That's 28. So 0 equals 28. Remember, in numerology, these numbers reduce. 8 and 2 is 10, and then 1 and 0 is 1. So 0 equals 1 in Gematria, and this is going to lead us into our discussion on the number 1. But I just wanted to point that. So let's talk about the number 1. We're going to look at this as a symbol. So many of you have seen also that obelisk. I'm not really good at drawing on these whiteboards, but let's, okay, that's horrible, but you get the point. The obelisk has been erected in many cultures around the world. And in its association with the number 1, it represents the male principle. So during a certain period in history, our civilizations began to experience a shift or change in what was once a matriarchal society, as many of you have heard, where it was more ruled or dominated by women, or women had a greater influence and impact on the planet. And that shift went to a more extreme in that it turned into patriarchal or dominance, because 1 is also associated with the fire element. Fire is a masculine element. Number 1 is a masculine principle. Hence the obelisk, which is an erect statue. So the notion of an erect statue, or what is very symbolic of the male principle, the phallus or the penis, is what this obelisk symbolizes, like the number 1. Interestingly enough, 1 also looks very similar to I. If you type I on your keyboard, it usually will look like this. So we are still talking about I, but when you type it, it has a very close resemblance to the number 1. Now the number 1 is also connected to the letter A. This is also associated with Aries, the first sign in the zodiac. Aries is connected to the ram. Aries is very much about the self and the self-identity and identifying the self through what energy and force is being exerted, and to get others to kind of conform to our needs. It's about the self. It's the first sign and individuality. So what words are associated with A to validate that A and 1 and the I are all associated? So we look at words like alpha. We look at words like authority, aggression, assertiveness. Even the word attitude, if I'm not mistaken, equates to 100, which is 1. So the attitude we form shapes our reality, shapes our perception about a thing. So your attitude plays a major part in how you experience the world, your attitude or outlook on things. We also can look at words like alone. And let's take a few I words like independent or isolation, individual. initiate, identity. All of these words associated with the I or the I am connects one and A. So if you have A in your name, particularly in the first letter in your name, or you have more than one A in your name, then you can certainly tune into the energies of the words I just mentioned. These people can tend to be or want to be the alpha male in the group, or can have a certain male presence, masculine presence or dominance about their character, behavior. And it could be misdirected. Remember that every number has its positive and negative polarity. So someone who is aggressive or assertive can use that energy for the good. They can be very enthusiastic and energetic and able to persuade people to follow them or believe them. They could be the leader of the pack, the alpha male. This could apply to women as well. But the negative side to that, or the polar expression of that, would be manipulative. You know, you could be too aggressive to where you push people away, you're too forceful, you're domineering, you're about controlling everyone and every situation to get what you want. It's about selfish needs and desires. So you have to make sure that you're actually expressing this from a balanced perspective, because although we see A as being alone, as being isolation, as being all about the self, as being all about the individualized perspective on things, remember that A came from zero, not A. One comes from zero, is birthed out of zero. So therefore you have to acknowledge that although this may have no mathematical value, this is remembering that within you and within every being, we have a masculine and a feminine presence within us. No one is all masculine. The most manliest of men is not all alpha individual self energy. It's also the balance of the feminine. We have, our bodies contain majority water. Water is a feminine element. So we each have these elemental expressions. We each have the feminine and masculine within us, but it's how it's projected, it's how it's understood, it's how it's integrated. So the number one, as I'm going to show, let's look at the word man. Man equals 10. That's 4, 1, 5. 5 and 4 is 9, plus 1 is 10. So the word man equals 1, which makes sense. As I just mentioned, we think of man as being the masculine, associated with that phallic symbol, as the male anatomy is identified through that. The symbol here, the erection. So man equals 1. Again, we see that the 1 and 0 would denote he's unified within himself, or he's merged or married the masculine and feminine principle within himself to be a whole being, to be unified. Even scripture says that man and woman are married and they become as one. So it doesn't mean that the feminine is eradicated or erased, although in history and times past, because of our ignorance, we've attempted to do that, to cover up and erase and discard the feminine, even on the earth, tearing down all the trees, cutting down all the trees, just abusing and raping the earth of her natural resources. We've attempted to do this, devalue the feminine, but it's not possible, because it's going to be repercussions and consequences as a result of that. It represents the womb. So it has to be honored and respected if man or mankind intends to continue to produce and create on our planet. Otherwise, we're going to be producing and creating and recreating based on our low desires, our ignorance, our selfish needs, and it's going to reflect on the earth, as the feminine principle directly represents the earth in its microcosm. Let's look at another word here. We're going to look at woman. I know many of you will say, like, woman is not a word. Yes, we say woman, but it's womb, womb man. So the woman or the woman, this equates to 9 in association with the feminine or the feminine. So the feminine, representing this 9 energy of completion and also a balance within it, in and of itself, which is another video, but just stick with me for a moment. Woman equates to 9 in simple gematria. So when you add the 9 and you add the 1, then again you get 10, which again equates to 1. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to point to the masculine as being the dominant energy force because it equates to 1. But the masculine represents the life force. It does represent the electric spark in terms of how creation comes about. So the woman houses or is like the incubator to creation or creativity. It's the earth. It receives, it's receptive. So in that respect, once the two come together, they represent one. There is no duality in that relationship, in that union. So whether or not you're in a actual relationship with your partner and it represents, two individuals coming together, or you're an individual, you're not in a relationship, but you're balancing the two forces within you, the two energies, masculine and feminine within you. When you bring that to a balance that allows you to create more holistically, that allows your creations to represent and reflect balance within you. So you have to appreciate and understand what they represent. You can't suppress or try and dominate one or the other. As women can use their powers of attraction and powers of sexual prowess, they can use their power in a way to dominate or control the masculine, and the masculine can quite literally use their force and their dominance and their control tactics to suppress and dominate or conquer over the woman. So this would reflect our shifting mindset, our lack of balance within our own being, within our own spiritual understanding of the self, that we're still evolving. We're still beginning to understand the need for balance, that we don't keep swinging in these extremes from one to the other. As time goes on and on, we just keep swinging. But we have to realize that there's a time where you have to consciously put forth the effort to balance that. Which reminds me, I failed to mention that the 0 can represent the unconscious because it is a void. That means anything can be absorbed by it. The same way the earth absorbs a lot. It absorbs not only the things that we pollute and we put on the earth and we build our roads and dump our waste, and it absorbs all of this, but the earth is a conscious entity. So it absorbs energy, and it represents, the 0 represents our unconscious. So whatever is happening in the human psyche is going to be reflected on the earth. So if we're in balance, it's no wonder that the earth is on a tilt. It doesn't represent this balance or consistency of energy flow. Whether you believe the earth is flat or it's a globe or it's a triangle, it still needs to represent a balance of energy flow. So when it's on a tilt, it could mean that the distribution of energy is obviously not even, it's not balanced, and that's going to reflect in human interaction. As rape and these things were not always present on the planet. It's almost a new phenomenon that these sexual abuses and rape and these particular things, you see an uptick in it as the male principal feels any form of feeling threatened by the feminine. This is subconscious. Keep that in mind. So you might not outwardly believe that you have any type of prejudice or fears of the rising of the feminine. You may not realize it, but if it's happening in your subconscious where you have this sort of fear that women in some capacity will begin to elevate in their consciousness and awareness of their value, it could create a fear complex in the male principle, and the male will begin to attack the feminine almost unconsciously, whether it's a literal attack in the form of rape, as I just mentioned, or it's an attack on women just in general, wanting to keep women suppressed, wanting to control how women express their feminine energy. So this is very powerful because this change and this shift in our collective consciousness is it's the divine feminine attempting to calibrate and balance things out. Because remember, the feminine naturally contains the positive and negative. The womb itself, the feminine The female anatomy itself reflects that negative and positive, contraction and expansion, receiving and giving and receiving. She gives birth. She also receives the seed of the man. So she naturally has this innate primordial instinct of balance. We see things balanced in nature with the seasons. We go through fall and winter, and then spring and summer, and we see the balance of that. That's a feminine projection in nature. So I'm going to wrap the video up here because I am ranting a little bit, but just understand that one can also represent resurrection. It represents force. It's electric energy. But ultimately, it is about balancing the two unifying principles within the self, that although the feminine has served as the unconscious, which is what many people aren't even paying attention to anyway. They don't realize they're a certain way until it manifests. A person may not realize they're racist or threatened by another race until they have some type of experience or encounter, and then all of a sudden their racist attitudes and prejudices come to the surface. This is because it was buried in the unconscious. So the feminine is allowing these things to come to the surface so man can see what they've been planting. If this represents any form of a womb, a cosmic womb, whatever is being planted in this womb is what's going to be manifested on the planet or in your life or in your experiences to show you what you've been planting in your unconscious or what you've been allowing into your unconscious. So this is bigger or greater than just us watching and seeing what's happening on the planet. We're judging or waiting to see how people are going to behave and where things are going and political changes, and we're just on standby. But you play an active part if you're in the collective and you're a human being on this planet. You play some role in what's being planted in the minds of others, and including what you're receiving and how you interpret that. So meditation allows you to enter into the unconscious for a moment and to do some house cleaning, to see what's in there, to pull your hatred, prejudice, fears, all of that stuff to the surface and confront it. So that way, when you empty these things out from yourself, you're able to reseed or replant or reintegrate with a new thought, a new spiritual insight, new wisdoms, new outlooks. And then this will be a part of the progression or the evolution of humanity. But when you choose to be on standby, to be cynical and critical and ignorant and blind to things, then life will happen to you. And everything that you put in there, you'll be like that person who, you have a bag of seeds, but you don't know what's what in this bag. You don't know what seeds create what. One of these seeds could be a sequoia tree, and one of these seeds could be a cactus or whatever. So you don't know what is going to manifest. It could be weeds altogether, things that are of no use to you. So don't plant in your mind or get too fixated on what's happening in the world in its more immediate sense. So if we're too focused on the political things or the social things or just what's happening in our world as being if we just get too fixated on that, it's not allowing us to consciously plant seeds that are going to benefit us in the future, because things are always kind of shifting and changing in that regard of social interaction and our emotions. So we can't get too fixated on that. We're entitled to have our opinion regarding these things, but human emotions are so unpredictable. So if I had to focus on something or plant seeds, I would rather focus on what's above, because as above, so below. Why would I be too focused on what's below and what's happening on the lower level and the lower plane when I could be manifesting and doing things on the higher plane as I'm in communication and in union with the God within? So if I'm in union and in communication with the God within, then I have no need to fear the outcome of things. Come life or death, I have no need to fear those things because I've already planted my seeds in its necessary places within my consciousness and my unconscious. So that's another video. Thank you guys for tuning in. Please share your thoughts on this subject. If you have A in your name, or you're pregnant, or you are thinking about having children, again, having A will allow them to just be a little more assertive in their self-expression. you know, not to be too passive, and it's an energy that can be very beneficial. And I didn't even mention when you think about the continents, you know, Africa, Asia, Australia, the Americas, all start with an A. So this is interesting as you look at how lands were being conquered, and that male energy was really dominating all over the world. So that archetype of the male and its representation of fire. And this is interesting if you want to do a little experiment, but be careful. If you have a lighter and you light the lighter, you can put your finger really close to the sides of the flame without really feeling the heat. It isn't until you put your hand above the flame that you can burn yourself. So you can almost put your hand close to the sides without really feeling the heat of the flame. But the moment you can even be this high away from the flame and you really feel that heat. So that has a lot to do with that male principle as well. That heat does rise, and it comes with a certain amount of force. And as I mentioned, it's electric. And when you think of electric or electrocution or electricity, it illuminates and it's hot. So another video, but thank you guys again, as I said, for tuning in. Share your thoughts and comments on that. And I think that was it. So until next time, peace.